Okay. So let's read it together, right? Now the case study says concern in Vietnam over trade with China. Concern in Vietnam with over trade with China. Table 1 shows the value of Vietnam's trade in goods with selected trading partners January to July 2014, right? So it has United States, it has China, Japan, South Korea, and Germany, right? So Vietnam trades with all these 5 countries. So export of goods, billion of dollars, right? So how much worth of goods did Vietnam exported to these countries? Uh, how many worth of goods did Vietnam exported to these countries, and how much worth of goods did Vietnam imported from these countries? That's also mentioned in the table, right? Now, what's the case study saying? Tycoon to the rescue as cheap Chinese goods overwhelm Vietnam's economy. Tycoon to the rescue as cheap Chinese goods overwhelm Vietnam's economies, right? So Vietnam is enjoying rapid growth, but its small businesses are being overwhelmed by a huge influx of cheap, mass-produced goods from China. These goods are undercutting the prices of domestically produced items. A Vietnamese entrepreneur has a rescue plan designed to support new business startups. He has spent 27 million developing his V Plus shopping mall. He is now offering new businesses rent-free 50-year leases in the mall. Wow. Which is located in Hanoi, as long as they sell only Vietnam made products, right? So what's happening in this case, right? So Vietnam is a country in Southeast Asia, right? And it's a relatively small country. So what has happened in Vietnam that they are getting a lot of competition from Chinese products, because as you can imagine, China produces on a large scale, their unit prices are too low, right? And I'm assuming that a lot of people would be buying Chinese products in Vietnam rather than Vietnamese products, right? Now, there is this entrepreneur based like Vietnamese entrepreneur that has done something very unique. What has he done? He has spent $27 million on developing this V Plus shopping mall. Now, what is this shopping mall? What does the shopping mall does? He's now offering businesses rent-free 50-year leases in the mall, right? So for 50 years, they can rent out that space in the mall without paying any rent, as long as located in Hanoi, as long as they only sell Vietnamese made products. He's also urging the Vietnamese government to introduce this idea nationwide to prevent the closure of tens of thousands of businesses each year and encourage customers to buy Vietnamese goods. Right? So he's asking the government to encourage, people to buy locally produced goods and to not buy imported products. China's exports to the world China exports to the world at very, very low prices, and that has put huge pressure on Vietnamese economies. He explained, I'm a businessman. I understand why firms can't develop. Without this kind of support, Vietnamese business will perish. China's recent devaluation of its currency, the yuan, triggered fears of China overwhelming Vietnam with even cheaper goods. As a result, Vietnamese central bank devalued the Vietnamese currency, the dong, right? Now, another problem that was happening over here, that not only China's products are cheap, but China has also devalued, or Chinese currency also became weaker against Vietnamese products, Vietnamese currency. And now Chinese products are even cheaper compared to what they were before, right? So what did Vietnam did in response to that? China's recent devaluation of its currency, the yuan, triggered fears of China overwhelming Vietnam with even cheaper goods. As a result, Vietnam's central bank devalued Vietnamese currency, the dong. So Vietnam also devalued its currency when China did, right? Despite the Vietnamese dislike of Chinese products, their prices made them unavoidable when Vietnamese businesses lack funds and household budgets are modest. There have been calls for boycotts of Chinese goods, but they have all failed miserably, right? In the past, what has happened that people in Vietnam have tried to, boycott Chinese products since they want to promote their local goods. But it says that since everyone is on limited budget and Chinese products are really cheap, so people eventually end up buying. So people eventually end up buying Chinese products. An economist at Asian Development Bank, however, said that V Plus concept showed good intentions, but the government should only support firms with the potential to compete. There needs to be change in the government's policy, he said. it needs to move away from subsidies for all goods towards targeted subsidies for industries with the potential to compete. Okay, now there's this development bank, just like there's World Bank, there's also Asian Development Bank, right? And it gives countries loans for development purposes and all that. Now what they're saying here is that it's a good concept, V plus, that you give your local businesses interest-free lease, and then interest-free lease, and then they can sell their products cheaply. But it says that the government should not give subsidies on all goods and services. Instead, the government should only give subsidies on products and industries which have the potential to compete. Right? We got on this? Okay. Now the source, Martin Petty, The Times, 18 April 2015. Okay. Now, Zohan, you have joined in late. We'll do a quick read of the case study, right? Right, we'll quickly do the case study, read the case study one more time, and then come to the questions. Okay, now listen to this, right? Right, so we'll quickly read the case study and then come to the questions, right? Concern in Vietnam over trade with China. Table 1, the values of Vietnamese trade in goods with selected trading partners, January to July 2014. Export of goods worth of billion of dollars with United States, China, I'm goods on, Japan, South Korea, Germany, right? So how many worth of goods did Vietnam exported to these countries, right? And their figures are being provided in the table. Similarly, how much worth of goods did Vietnam import from these countries? Their value is also mentioned in the table, right? Okay, now what's the case study saying? Tycoon to the rescue as cheap Chinese goods overwhelm Vietnam's economy, right? Vietnam is enjoying rapid growth, but its small businesses are being overwhelmed by a huge influx of cheap, massively produced products from China. These goods are undercutting the prices of domestically produced items, right? A Vietnamese entrepreneur has a rescue plan designed to support new business startups. He has spent $27 million developing his V Plus shopping mall. He is now offering new businesses rent-free 50-year leases in the mall, which is located in Hanoi, as long as they sell only Vietnamese-made products. He's also urging the Vietnamese government to introduce this idea nationwide to prevent closure of tens of thousands of businesses each year and encourage customers to buy Vietnamese goods. Right. So the idea is that this Vietnamese entrepreneur, is encouraging customers. Firstly, he has established this V Plus mall. The name of the mall is V Plus, and he's offering 50-year leases, right? Lease is what? When you rent out something, right? So this guy is offering 50-year leases to Vietnamese brands, Vietnamese businesses. And if they're only selling Vietnamese goods, then they can get this shopping mall leased for 50 plus years without any rent, right? He's also encouraging, he's also asking his government, Vietnamese government, to, promote this idea nationwide across the country. And so that it can prevent the closure of tens of thousands of businesses each year that happened due to cheap imports from China. China's exports to the world at very, very low prices, and that puts huge pressure on Vietnamese economy. He explained, I'm a businessman. I understand why firms can't develop. Without this kind of support, Vietnamese businesses will perish. China's recent devaluation of its currency, the yuan, triggered fears of China overwhelming Vietnam with even cheaper goods. As a result, Vietnam's central bank devalued the Vietnamese currency, the dong, right? So China was already selling cheaper goods, but recently Chinese currency has also become devalued, right? Weaker against Vietnamese currency. And that means that now Chinese products will be even cheaper for Vietnamese consumers, right? So in the light of this, what Vietnam did, that Vietnam also devalued its currency. Right. So, I mean, his model would be different, Johan. His model would be different. So he's not directly in competition with other local businesses. He is providing a service to other businesses, right? So just imagine if for 50 plus years, he provides the lease. So it's a huge investment that he has made. But after those, after 50 years, then imagine how much more rent he can collect when these businesses eventually establish themselves and all that, right? So I mean that's the kind of plan that sometimes businesses have, that initially they provide a product for free, and then in the longer run they get to make huge amounts of profit. So that might be the reason. Or he might just be a good entrepreneur who wants to just benefit the local businesses, right? So it happens. Okay, despite the Vietnamese dislike of Chinese products, their prices make them unavoidable when Vietnamese businesses lack funds and household budgets are modest. There has been calls for boycotts of Chinese goods, but they have all failed miserably, right? So in the past, people have tried to, boycott Chinese products. Why? Because they want to promote local goods. But since their products are so cheap, Chinese products are so cheap that it has not helped them, right? I mean, these boycott strategies have failed miserably. An economist at the Asian Development Bank, however, said that V plus concept showed good intentions, but the government should only support firms with the potential to compete, right? There needs to be a change in the government policy, he said. It needs to move away from subsidies for all goods towards targeted subsidies for industries with the potential to compete. Now, this is a very, very important point, right? Now, what this economist at Asian Development Bank is saying, that V plus is a good concept, like promoting local businesses is a great concept. It should be supported by the government, but at the same time, government should not support all businesses. It should not provide subsidies towards all goods and services, and should only provide subsidies towards targeted industries which have the potential to compete, right? So that's what it says. Okay, is everyone clear on this? So this is again a very simple and straightforward case study, nothing complicated, and kind of easy, right? Very good, nice. Okay, now let's look at the first question students here. So the first question here says, right, let me first write this down. Let me increase the size of this thing, right? So this is the first question, and let me also mention what year this is. What year this is. This is May, June, not May, June, February, March. This is Feb, March 2017, right? 2017, and the variant is 2, right? Okay. Okay. State the country shown in table 1 that has the greatest deficit on its balance of trade in goods with Vietnam. Which country has the greatest deficit on its balance of trade in goods with Vietnam, right? So let's go to the table above and let's see which country has the biggest deficit against Vietnam, right? So obviously deficit would mean that you should be exporting more and you should be importing less. Exporting more, importing less. So just by looking at the values, you can tell which country has the biggest deficit against Vietnam. Which country has the biggest deficit against Vietnam, right? United States, right? You've already done this case study before. Okay, so it's the United States, because you're exporting $15.9 billion worth of goods and you're only importing 3.7 billion worth of goods, right? Okay. Now this is great. Perfect. Right. Now the next question here says, students, identify the 3 other components of the balance of payments that would allow you to calculate the current account balance of Vietnam with that country, right? Now, what are the other 3 components of current account apart from the trade in goods? Apart from the trade in goods, what are the other components of current account? Yeah, quickly, right? So current account comprises of 3 other components. What are those? Right, that's correct. What else? Is it? What are the other components that you use to calculate the current account balance? Okay, Zuan, what's the third one? Okay, okay. Let me answer that. Let me answer that. Students, now this is very important. You are kind of confusing everything. So the trade in goods, we remember we said that there are 4 subsections of current account. There are 4 subsections of current account. So there's trade in goods, there is trade in services, there is income, and the 4th one, Zohan, which you confused with transfer payments, not transfer payments, it's current transfers. Right now, I do know that these words kind of sound similar, but you have to be very careful here. Why? Because the idea is students, trade in goods, trade in services, income, and current transfer, right? So the difference between, Zuhan, current transfers and transfer payments. Transfer payments are the payments that the government make to disadvantaged people, like unemployment benefits, child support payments and all that. Those are transfer payments. Transfer payments, right? You take taxes from the rich, you give it to the poor. Transfer payments. Current transfers, on the other hand, yeah, be careful you get this correct, right? So Current transfers, on the other hand, is one-sided payments that the government, international one-sided payments, right? So like you are receiving aid from some country, or you're giving aid to some country and things like that, right? Easy. We got on this? Okay. Now, for the primary and the secondary balance, listen to this carefully, students. Now, the primary and the secondary balance. So these two components, trade in goods and trade in services, is known as primary balance. Sorry, my bad. The primary balance is defined as the income that you're getting. Income is also another name for the income, is also primary balance, primary income. Sorry, primary income. Income is also known as primary income, and current transfer is also known as secondary income. Let me explain you why we use this wording. Now listen to this carefully, right, students? So what was income? Do you remember? Income records, students, income records income that you get on foreign held assets, right? So income that your nationals are earning on foreign held assets, like someone is Pakistani and they have property abroad, or they have investment in abroad in other banks and foreign stock exchanges and all that. So whatever income you earn on those foreign held assets, that would be recorded in the income section, and that is defined as primary income. And what is current transfers? Current transfers are unilateral, which means one-way transfers between government, right? And like for instance, you are giving aid to a country, you're receiving aid from a country, remittance and all that, right? So that's known as secondary income, because that's not a big proportion, right? So secondary income, the remittance and the aid that you're receiving from other countries, that's not a very primary source, right? So primary means obviously major source of something. Secondary source means not that major source of something, right? So primary income is defined as the income itself. Why? Because this is the income that your nationals are earning on foreign held assets, as I gave you some examples. So let's say a Pakistani has some property abroad and they're making some rent on that. Similarly, they have investment in foreign, foreign businesses, right? They have established businesses in foreign countries and they are receiving profit on that, or they have invested in foreign stock exchanges and they're making profit on that. So all of that would be recorded in income section, and that's defined as primary income. Current transfers, on the other hand, is defined as secondary income. Does this help? Khizr? Country residence from dividends and profits, right? Yes, exactly. Now, is everything clear? So next time you hear the word primary and secondary income, you would know that the income is known as, the income section in current account is known as primary income, and the current transfer is known as secondary income. Okay, very nice, excellent. So since it was only for 3 marks and you had to identify, so you don't need to explain anything, right, students? So be very careful with the wording that's being used. Identify. Identify just means state, list. You don't need to write anything more than that, right? Now, the next question says, explain any 2 factors that would determine the impact of China's decision to devalue yuan upon Vietnam's trade with China. 2 factors that would determine the impact of China's decision to devalue yuan upon Vietnam's trade with China. So what do you think? So what are the 2 factors that will determine how much impact the Chinese devaluation, Chinese currency devaluation will have on Vietnamese economy? Did you get the question, students? So let me tell you what the question is asking for. So think about this. Whenever something happens, right? So we do know that the extent of effect it has on the economies involved depends on other factors, right? So if exchange rate is being devalued, in this case, Chinese exchange rate is being devalued against Vietnamese exchange rate, then it says that what 2 factors will determine the intensity, what 2 factors determine the extent of impact this will have on the Vietnam's economy, or the trade Vietnam has with China, right? So what 2 factors will determine that how much impact would devaluation of Chinese currency will have with the trade it does with Vietnam? So what do you think? What are the 2 factors that will determine this impact? Any idea? Should be simple. Take some time, think about it. Right, that's correct. That's one factor. What about the other factors? One. Fazir, what do you think? Did you get this question, Fazir? So what 2 factors will determine the, right, yeah, extent of effect that Chinese devaluation of Chinese currency will have on the Vietnamese economy? right? So the first one, as Johan rightly said, is the price elasticity of demand. Johan, what about the other one? Now, right. Okay. PES. Okay. Okay. Right. Khizr, can you explain me that? I mean, what makes you think that that would be an important factor? Uh, that's correct, Johan. Right. So that was one thing that you mentioned, and the second thing that you mentioned was, uh, right, right. Hmm, right. Okay, so uh, so these are the two factors that. Uh, so just a second, and the third one that you mentioned was, right, trade barriers. Okay, so I'm listing down all the factors that you have mentioned here, and then we'll discuss each one of these one by one. Income trade protection, I mean, okay, right. Khizr, have a look at this. Now, let's first talk about, uh, right? Let's talk about each of these factors one by one, right? So the first one is price elasticity of demand. So that's very simple and obvious, right? Now think about this. Since what happens when devaluation happens? Now, with devaluation, another country's currency is becoming cheaper, right? So if previously it was 1 yuan equals 10 Vietnamese dong, right? Dong is their currency, DONG, right? So if 1 yuan used to buy 10 dong back in the day, now 1 yuan is buying 5 dong, right? So 1 yuan was buying 10 dong. 1 yuan of China was buying 10 dong of Vietnam in the past. Now 1 yuan is buying 5 dong of Vietnamese currency. Now, if you think of it, now for Vietnamese consumers, Chinese products are cheaper. Why? Because they have to pay, previously they had to pay 10 dong to buy 1 yuan worth of good. Now they only have to pay 5 dong to buy 1 yuan worth of good. Easy. Is everyone clear on this? Okay. Now that's what the exchange rate devaluation means now, right? Price elasticity of demand would be important because if the price elasticity of demand is more elastic, if the PED of Chinese products, PED of Chinese products is more elastic, then due to cheaper Chinese products, Vietnam would import more due to cheaper Chinese products. Vietnam would import more Chinese goods, right? Because what happens is more elastic. The idea is really simple that if there's a small decrease in price and the price elasticity of demand is more elastic, then there is significant increase in demand. Due to small decrease in price of the good, there is huge increase in the demand for the product. That's more elastic. Yes or no? On the other hand, if Chinese products demand is less elastic, then any decrease in the price of Chinese products will not have huge increase in demand. Yes or no? Right. Right, exactly. Quality of exports is also a thing, right? Johan, let me answer that for you, right? So quality of the goods, we are coming to that, right? So did everyone get this? Right. So then another thing that could be important is the quality, right? I mean, you can definitely talk about it, but what I was thinking about was, which could be more important, is substitute of Chinese products, right? Now think about this. How good substitutes Vietnam has for Chinese products, that will also determine the devaluation. So even though Chinese currency is devalued against, is getting devalued against dong, but if you have good alternatives with good Vietnamese alternatives available, right, in Vietnam, and therefore people don't need to rely on Chinese products, then I think the demand for Chinese products might not increase significantly. Are you getting me? Again, so it's just like saying that, think about this. If our currency is becoming stronger against China, Pakistan's currency becomes stronger against China, that's great. Now Chinese products are cheaper for us. But if we already have good Pakistani products which are available, in the market, and these products are equally good as are the Chinese products, then we might not import from China, and we would want to buy local products. Yes or no? But if, on the other hand, we do not have good substitutes for Chinese products, and Chinese products don't have local alternatives, local substitutes, right? Then obviously people will have no option but to buy from China. Yes or no? So that's one way of explaining this. Then similarly, quality could also be important. So quality means that if Chinese products are a better quality product compared to locally produced goods, then obviously people would go for Chinese goods rather than locally manufactured goods. Yes or no? Right? So out of all these things, you could talk about any two. So you have to explain, identify first, and then explain why do you think that would have an impact. Easy? Is this clear? Okay. So Zohan, you're asking me how to study for the exams, right? So it's almost less than a month left before your exams. So nowadays you should only be focusing on the past papers, right? So whatever time suits you in Ramzan, you should, design your schedule, your study hours accordingly, that like based on the time that suit you. But you should be spending good 4 or 5 hours daily, minimum 4 or 5 hours of concentrated effort for studying, right? And you should be focusing more on the subjects which are where you need more help, right? Which are kind of a little weak and you need more support there, and less time should be spent studying other subjects which you are relatively stronger in, right? So that is how you should be going forward with this, right? On all subjects. Right. Okay, great. That's very nice. If you're done with the syllabus on all subjects, then you should be doing past papers practice a lot. And again, out of your subjects, out of 3 or 4, whatever the number of subjects you are taking, whichever subjects you feel like you need more, practice in, then those subjects should be taking most of your time. Right. Practice. It's all about practice, right? So maths is an ideal example, right? So once you have learned the concept of any topic, whether that be differentiation, integration, then the more the practice you do, the better you become, right? Keep practicing, right? Check your answers with the marking scheme, do as many past papers as much you can, right? If there's anything confusing, keep asking teachers and so on, right? So that's how you should go with it. Okay, students, next question here says, explain how subsidies for all Vietnamese products and a boycott, have a look at this, right? So the question here says, explain how subsidies for all Vietnamese products and a boycott of Chinese goods are expected to help Vietnam goods to compete with Chinese goods. Use supply and demand diagrams to support your answers, right? Right. Okay. Now, students, think about this. So the idea is that explain how subsidies for all Vietnamese goods and a boycott of Chinese goods are expected to, help Vietnamese goods to compete with Chinese goods. Use supply and demand diagrams to support your answer. Right. Okay. Now let's first talk about how export subsidies will help Vietnamese goods. Right. So what do you think of this? No worries. Right. Now, when a country, let's first understand the theoretical side of it, and then we'll come to the graphical side of this, right? So when a country provides subsidies on its products, what happens? Technically, government is providing financial support to its local businesses. With that financial support, what happens is that your cost of production decreases, which means that it becomes more profitable to produce that thing, and you can produce more output of that product, right? So the supply of your good on which you're receiving subsidies shifts to the right. So if Vietnam government is providing subsidies to Vietnamese products, then the supply of these products will shift to the right. Easy. Okay. Now, how will that make Vietnamese products more competitive, right? So if, let's say, previously a Vietnamese product used to be produced for 10 dong, right? Now with subsidies, it might be produced with 7 dong or 8 dong. So since the prices would overall be lesser for that product on which you're receiving subsidies, obviously these products become more price competitive on international markets, right? Okay. Now, another thing that could happen is that you boycott will make competitive international market. The firm will be able to afford to buy advanced technology, which will make the quality to be more competitive. Right, correct. Quality to be more competitive, absolutely correct, right? Then think about this, students. Then how would boycott of Chinese products help, right? So another thing that we're supposed to talk about is also that when a country is boycotting another country's, you know, products, how would that help to increase the competitiveness of your local goods, right? Now have a look at this. Let's talk about the diagrams. Look at the diagrams here, right? So let's first talk about, students, let's first talk about the subsidy diagram. Okay, now we will make two diagrams simultaneous to each other, right? So on the left, let's say you have the market for Vietnam, and on the right, you have the market for China, right? Okay, now why I'm showing you two diagrams at the same time, you will get to find it out in a bit, right? So on this diagram, you'll say it's price in yuan, price in, this is Chinese market, so obviously the price would be in yuan, their local currency, and like any other demand and supply diagram, it would be the output, right? Quantity, right? On the x-axis, right? And on the left graph, you will have price in dong, which is Vietnamese currency. So you'll have price in dong, and you will have quantity on the x-axis. Easy, good on this. Any confusion so far, students? Anything that's not clear? Okay, so you will have output over here. Okay, now what you need to do, first of all, have a look at this. So the normal downward sloping will be the initial demand for the product. In Vietnam, normal upward sloping will be supply of the product in Vietnam, right? Now look at this diagram carefully, students, right? So we are looking at export subsidies, or we are just looking at the government subsidies that government provides. So initially your supply in Vietnam was S1. Initially the demand for the product in your market was D1, right? Now where the demand and supply for the good were equal, that was your initial equilibrium. And let's assume the prices were 10 dong, right? So price of any product that was being produced had a value of 10 dong, or let's make it 100 dong, right? So this product was previously priced at 100 dong in 100 dong in Vietnam, right? Okay. Now what happens next? Then you have then the government provides subsidies, right? So when the government provides subsidies, as we just talked about this, right? Your supply curve shifts to the right because your cost of production decreases. So your supply curve will shift from S1 to S2. Now the new equilibrium will be where the new supply curves intersect with your demand curve, right? Now this is the way where the new equilibrium will be, and you can see for yourselves the new equilibrium price is lower, right? So now let's say each unit of the good is being sold for 80 dong compared to 100 dong, which was the previous price of the good, right? Now, is this making sense? Right? So similarly, why did I make the Chinese graph simultaneously to this, right? Let me explain you, right? So in China, nothing changed. In the Chinese market, students, nothing changed, right? So subsidies only being provided in Vietnam and not in China. Yes or no? Right? So the Chinese economy will still operate the same way. Upward sloping is the supply, downward sloping is the demand, right? Yes or no? Right? Down sloping is the demand. So let's say whatever the price was, let's say it was 10 yuan, right? So it was 10 yuan. Now let me complete the graph and then I'll explain you what. Okay. Now if let's say 1 yuan is equal to 10 dong, 1 yuan is equal to 10 dong, right? So have a look at this, students. 1 yuan is equals to 10 1 yuan. Oh, my writing tab is messing up, right? Okay, is equals to 10 dong. Now students, think about this. The idea is that your exchange rate between yuan and dong was 1 to 10, right? So 1 yuan used to buy 10 dong. Now think about this. previously the two market prices were the same, right? So whatever this product costed you in China, right, 10 yuan was the same as much it costed you in Vietnam, that was 100 dong, right? Because 10 yuan, obviously 1 yuan is equals to 10 dong. So 10 yuan will be equals to 100 dong. Yes or no? Right? So previously the two values were equal in the two countries. Yes or no? Easy? This is making sense, right? But then what happened? In Vietnam, the government started providing subsidies to make their products more competitive, which caused a rightward shift in the supply of Vietnamese products, right? Which caused a rightward shift in Vietnamese market, and therefore the price dropped to 80 dong, right? Which is now cheaper compared to what it is in China. Therefore, local consumers in Vietnam would prefer local goods rather than importing from China. Yes or no? Right? And there could be price wars or dumping strategy used by China, which will lead to lower exports and less market share. Uh, right. Uh, you are not, Zwan, the question is not asking you to really analyze. Let's look at the question one more time. The question says, just to explain how subsidies and boycotts of these Chinese products is expected to help Vietnam goods to compete with Chinese goods, right? So, you are saying the right thing that, if you use boycott policies and everything, other countries would retaliate. And that would mean that in the longer run, your exports would be affected. But I don't think so. This is exactly how what the question is asking for, because it did not say analyze, right? So when the wording says analyze, then you are expected to analyze and tell what aspects, what different ways this thing can go. But if it only says explain, then that means you're only expected to explain that how one thing will cause another thing, right? So when it says explain, it just means that you have to explain how one thing is causing another thing, but you do not need to analyze that whether it will be a good thing to do, bad thing to do, so on and so forth. Are you getting me? So this is very important that you understand the keywords and what meaning they are conveying, right? We just have to explain. Yes, right. So in explain, Zohan, we'll look at the marking scheme as well, right? So we'll look at the marking scheme as well after we do this, right? But in explain, Fizzer and Zohan, you have to tell how one variable is causing another, right? So if I say explain how interest rate, right? Yesterday we had a question, right? How interest rates, explain how fall in interest rates will cause a change in consumer spending, or will affect consumer spending. Now, in this question, you only need to tell that whenever interest rates are changing, how will that result in change in consumer spending? Like the same, analysis that we always use, that lower interest rate means that now borrowing is cheaper, so people will borrow more, they'll spend more. When they spend more, there will be overall increase in consumer spending. So that's the explain part. When it says analyze, now when it says analyze, right, then you have to tell that lower interest rates would make borrowing cheaper, and people might borrow more. However, it also depends on how much lending the banks are doing. So if banks are doing extensive lending, then obviously more borrowing will happen and there will be more spending. But if banks are a little strict with lending money to people, they have strict scrutiny checks, and they do thorough background screening and test to make sure that the person they're lending to is worthy of that loan and will be able to pay it back, then even though interest rates are decreasing, there might not be a lot of lending, right? So this is how you kind of analyze. In analyze, you look at, so if the question would have said analyze how this boycott would have affected the trade between China and Vietnam, then in that you could have said that retaliation would decrease imports from China in the short run, but since China is expected to do the same against Vietnamese products and impose trade barriers against Vietnam goods coming from Vietnam to China, then therefore in the long run, Vietnam exports will be affected, right? So that's the difference between the two words, explain and analyze, right? Okay, now the first of all, students, is this clear? The subsidy part that I explained you, right? How subsidy will make Vietnamese products more competitive. If that is clear, then we'll move on and we'll look at the boycott, right? So when a country is boycotting, right? So what it means, now this is not imposing tariff, or this is not a quota, or this is not anything of the sort. Now, a boycott means complete, you know, stop, complete ban or complete stop of products coming from another country, right? Now, listen to this very carefully. Now we are making the graph for, Vietnam, right? So because it's the Vietnam that's importing goods, right? So it's the Vietnam that's importing goods from China, right? So we'll have so price in dong, and we will have quantity or output on the x-axis. Easy. Okay, now students, think about this. So initially the market will be in equilibrium. Initially the market will be in equilibrium with downward sloping demand for the product in Vietnam, and upward sloping will be the supply of the good in the market, right? So have a look at this. Now, this is the local supply and demand for any product in Vietnam, right? Okay, so if there are no imports, right, then obviously the market would be in equilibrium at this point where the supply and demand curves intersect, and that will show you the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. Any confusion so far, right? However, students, this is not what happens when your markets are open for international trade. When your markets are open for international trade, how do you draw the supply curve? The world supply from the world is a straight horizontal line that is lower, often below the equilibrium price. Why is it below the equilibrium price? Now listen to this very carefully. So the international world supply for any product in your home country is below the equilibrium price in your market. Why? Because since imported goods are cheaper, that's why you are preferring imported goods rather than local goods. Since imported goods are cheaper, right, which means that their price is lower than the price that's prevailing in the local market. Therefore, consumers prefer imported goods, cheaper imported goods rather than buying local goods. Is this making sense or not? Right? Is it making sense, students? Right? Okay. Now, if China is importing, so let's say the price of each unit of any product in Vietnam initially was 100 dong, right? 100 dong. Whereas you can buy the same, you can import the same product from China for 70 dong, right? So obviously Chinese products, as you can tell by the price, is more competitive, right? So people would prefer to import from China rather than to buy locally. Yes or no? But then what happens? Then the Vietnamese government boycotts these products, or the local consumers, Vietnamese consumers, boycott Chinese products. With that thing happening, students, this supply would no more be there, right? Because people are not buying that at all. How many of you are getting this, right? So initially, this was the equilibrium in the market where this much was the total demand in the Vietnam market, right? And this much was the total local supply in Vietnam for that good. And the difference in the demand and supply was what? And the difference in the demand and supply was your imports, which are coming from where? Imports were coming from China, because Chinese products, as you can see, were cheaper compared to locally produced goods. Easy. Now, this being said, but now when the country completely boycotts, a foreign good, so it's only the local supply and local demand, right? So this thing would be no more relevant here, right? So this cancels out, and the market will go back to the initial equilibrium where the total price for the good would be the same based on local supply and demand, and the total quantity consumed in the market would be where the local supply and demand are intersecting, right? Easy, students? Okay, now the class is about to end. Quickly rejoin with the same link so that we can do the last question and check our answers with the marking scheme. Quickly rejoin with the same link.